Pack your things, Higgins. You are done here. We have a $25 million lithium-ion battery shipment arriving from Asia, and I am not letting your paranoid safety checklists stand in the way of our growth. That was Preston Harrington, our new chief operating officer, screaming in my face in the boardroom. He was 32 years old, wore tailored suits that cost more than my first car, and possessed a fresh business degree and absolute ignorance of federal trade laws. I did not raise my voice. I gathered my notebook, stood up, and walked out of the Summit Maritime Group headquarters. Preston thought he had cleared a roadblock. He did not realize he had just pulled the pin on a regulatory hand grenade, and the countdown had begun. My name is Walter Higgins. I am 55 years old, and for 23 years, my life has revolved around international trade compliance. I started at Summit Maritime Group in the year 2003, when the founder, George Harrington, hired me as a junior clerk in San Pedro, near the port of Los Angeles. George was a practical logistics veteran who built the business on reliability. I spent my days verifying harmonized tariff schedule codes and ensuring every shipment complied with the regulations of United States Customs and Border Protection. In the year 2008, I spent 6 months studying for the customs broker license examination, a grueling test with an 11% pass rate. It requires deep knowledge of Title 19 of the Code of Federal Regulations, customs valuation, and port entry procedures. I passed on my first attempt, receiving my individual license from the Department of Homeland Security. George was so thrilled that he promoted me to compliance director and gave me a small equity stake. As Summit Maritime Group expanded into a $180 million international freight forwarder, my license became the bedrock of the operation. In the United States, a corporation cannot act as a customs broker without a corporate customs broker permit. Under Federal Regulation 19, CFR Section 111.19, to maintain that permit, the corporation must employ at least one individually licensed broker who holds the status of a corporate officer. I was that officer. My individual license, number 228490, was registered with the Port Director of United States Customs and Border Protection as the sole qualifying foundation for the company's operating permit. Without my license attached to the corporate registration, Summit Maritime Group did not have the authority to clear a single shipping container through any port of entry in the United States. For years, George Harrington respected the weight of my position, knowing compliance was the shield that kept the government from shutting down our operations. We had a great partnership. I kept the paperwork immaculate and handled federal audits without a single violation. But 3 years ago, George began stepping back due to health issues. That was when his son, Preston Harrington, returned from business school with a desire to modernize the firm. To Preston, compliance was just an expensive bottleneck. He looked at my department's budget and saw red ink. He could not comprehend why we spent weeks auditing safety data sheets and country of origin certificates. He believed logistics was simple. You put a box on a ship, you take it off, and you deliver it. He hired young sales managers who promised clients rapid customs clearance with 0 delays. They began bypassing our internal compliance checks and pressuring our clerks to file customs declarations before we received verified manifests. Every time I flagged a non-compliant shipment, Preston would lecture me on agility. "Walter, you are living in the past," he would tell me, leaning back in his leather chair. "This is the era of modern e-commerce. Amazon clears millions of packages a day. We cannot let your outdated obsession with regulations slow down our transit times. The clients want their goods now. Amazon has massive compliance infrastructures, Preston." I would reply calmly, "If we file a false declaration, or if we clear dangerous cargo without the required permits, the penalties are not just financial. The government can revoke our operating authority, and the individuals signing the manifests can face criminal liability under federal law." He waved his hand dismissively, convinced my warnings were merely the defense mechanism of a corporate dinosaur. He only cared about the quarterly volume reports and the massive $25 million contract he was negotiating with Voltage Solutions, a domestic battery distributor importing lithium-ion power cells from a low-cost factory in Asia. I had been monitoring the Voltage Solutions account, and the shipping documents they provided were a mess. The lithium-ion batteries lacked the mandatory UN 38.3 safety certification reports, which prove they have undergone rigorous thermal and short-circuit testing. Without these tests, lithium batteries are highly volatile and classified as Class 9 hazardous materials. Importing them without certified packaging and proper declarations is a severe violation. I warned Preston repeatedly that we could not legally clear these shipments. But Preston had already promised the client a guaranteed 48-hour turnaround from port arrival to warehouse delivery. He had no intention of letting safety standards get in the way. The stage was set for a head-on collision. The crisis began on a rainy Friday morning. I was sitting at my desk, drinking my second cup of black coffee, when the automated customs screening queue flagged a new import folder. It was the first major shipment for Voltage Solutions under the new contract Preston had signed. A fleet of container ships was arriving at the port of Los Angeles, and the initial shipment consisted of 120 containers of lithium-ion batteries. I opened the digital folder to review the customs entry documents, expecting the worst. The reality was far more alarming than I had anticipated. The ocean bills of lading and the commercial invoices had been uploaded, but the description of the merchandise was listed as standard consumer electronic accessories. There was no mention of lithium-ion batteries, no hazardous material placards, and no UN 38.3 safety testing documentation. The shipper had intentionally misclassified the cargo to bypass the automated hazard screening protocols used by United States Customs and Border Protection. This was not a simple administrative error. This was a deliberate attempt to smuggle non-compliant, high-risk hazardous materials into the United States. Under Title 18, Section 545 of the United States Code, smuggling goods by introducing them with false declarations is a federal crime punishable by heavy fines and up to 20 years in prison. Furthermore, under Department of Transportation hazmat regulations, transporting uncertified lithium batteries on commercial shipping vessels poses a severe fire hazard. If one of those containers caught fire in the hold of a cargo ship, the results could be catastrophic. I immediately placed a hard compliance block on the shipment in our internal customs entry system. This block locked the file, preventing our entry clerks from submitting the required Customs and Border Protection Form 3461. Without that form, the cargo could not be released from the port terminal. 10 minutes later, the door to my office slammed open. Preston Harrington stormed in, his face flushed with anger. Behind him stood the vice president of sales, who was nervously clutching a printout of the locked customs file. "Higgins, what the hell is the meaning of this?" Preston shouted, slamming his fist onto my wooden desk. "The Voltage shipment is sitting at the terminal, and my sales team tells me you just locked the entire entry file. Do you have any idea what you are doing? That client is paying us a premium to move this cargo through the port immediately. The distribution center has trucks scheduled for Monday morning. Clear the block right now." "I cannot clear it, Preston," I said, my voice steady. "The shipment is misclassified. The documentation states the cargo is electronic accessories, but the actual packing list confirms they are lithium-ion batteries. They are missing the mandatory safety certifications and hazardous manifests. Declaring this cargo as standard electronics to customs is compliance fraud. It is a violation of federal law, and as the qualifying broker for this firm, I will not authorize it. It is a technicality." Preston sneered, leaning over my desk. "The manufacturer is one of the largest in Asia. They know how to build batteries. They just have not finished the paperwork for this specific batch yet. We will get the certificates next month. Right now, we need to move the cargo. Voltage is paying us a $25 million annual retainer. If we miss their delivery window, they have a contract clause that allows them to walk. I am not letting your old-school bureaucracy ruin my biggest deal. It is not a technicality, Preston." "It is a federal felony," I explained, pointing to the regulations on my screen. Under 19 CFR Section 111.29, a licensed customs broker is legally required to exercise responsible supervision and control over the customs business of the corporation. If I knowingly allow our clerks to submit a fraudulent entry for hazardous cargo, I am personally liable. My license can be permanently revoked, and the company faces fines up to $30,000 per entry, not to mention the criminal charges for smuggling. You compliance guys are all the same, the vice president of sales chimed in, always finding reasons to say no instead of helping us make money. We are a logistics company, Walter. Our job is to move cargo, not act as unpaid federal agents. Our job is to operate within the law, I replied. If we get caught, United States Customs will audit every single entry we have filed in the last 5 years. It will destroy this company. I will not sign off on this shipment without the verified safety certificates. That is my final decision. Preston stared at me, his eyes narrowing. We will see about that, he whispered before turning and storming out of my office. For the next few hours, my office was unusually quiet. I knew Preston was plotting his next move, but I remained firm. I had spent 23 years building a reputation for absolute integrity in this industry. I was not going to throw it away to protect a spoiled executive's quarterly bonus. At 3 o'clock in the afternoon, my assistant informed me that Preston had called an emergency leadership meeting in the main boardroom. When I walked in, I saw the entire executive committee, including the Director of Human Resources and the Vice President of Operations. George Harrington, the Chief Executive Officer, was absent, still recovering at a private healthcare clinic after minor heart surgery. Preston sat at the head of the long glass table, looking smug. "Walter, take a seat," Preston said, pointing to a chair at the far end of the room. I sat down and remained silent. "We are here today to discuss a serious matter of operational obstruction," Preston began, addressing the room. Summit Maritime Group is a company built on growth and modernization. Unfortunately, some senior staff are unable to adapt to the speed of modern business. Walter Higgins has refused a direct executive order to clear our largest client's cargo, risking a $25 million account due to an outdated, pedantic interpretation of administrative guidelines. He turned his gaze back to me. "Walter, you have repeatedly shown hostility toward our growth strategies. Because of your refusal to cooperate, I have no choice but to terminate your employment with Summit Maritime Group, effective immediately. We are letting you go for gross insubordination and failure to execute your duties." He slid a manila folder across the table. Inside was a termination letter and a meager severance package offering 4 weeks of pay, on the condition that I sign a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement and waive my right to sue. The room was silent. None of the other executives looked me in the eye. They knew I had spent more than 2 decades dedicating my life to this firm, but they were too afraid of Preston's temper and his father's influence to speak up. I picked up the folder, read the termination letter, and closed it. I did not raise my voice or show anger. I looked at Preston and smiled slightly. "Understood," I said calmly. "I will sign the termination receipt, but I will not sign the severance agreement or the non-disclosure waiver. I will pack my desk and vacate the building by 5 o'clock. Preston smirked, clearly surprised by my lack of resistance. "Make sure he is escorted out by security and disable his building access." Immediately, he ordered the Human Resources Director. "We do not need any disgruntled employees lingering around." "I will be out of your way shortly, Preston," I said, standing up. "I wish you the best of luck with the Voltage shipment." 10 minutes later, a security guard stood outside my office as I packed my personal belongings into a cardboard box. My assistant, Clara Owens, looked at me with tears in her eyes. I patted her shoulder, took my box, and walked out into the rain. Preston thought he had just won the battle. He had no idea that by firing me, he had just removed the only legal pillar supporting his entire logistics empire. When I got home on Friday evening, I placed my box of office belongings on the kitchen counter, poured myself a glass of single malt scotch, and sat down on my living room sofa. The silence of my house was a stark contrast to the chaotic boardroom. For 23 years, I had carried the stress of Summit Maritime Group on my shoulders. Now that weight was gone, but I was not about to let them walk away cleanly after treating me like an obstacle to be discarded. I opened my personal laptop and booted up the Automated Commercial Environment Portal, known in the logistics industry as ACE. This is the secure web portal managed by United States Customs and Border Protection that connects customs brokers, shipping lines, and importers directly to the federal customs processing computers. Every individual customs broker has a personal profile in the ACE portal linked to their credentials. Under my profile, my individual license, number 228490, was designated as the active qualifying license for Summit Maritime Group Corporate Brokerage Permit, permit number 95-2018. By terminating my employment and revoking my corporate officer status, Preston Harrington had legally severed my connection to the company. But the registration in the Customs and Border Protection database did not update automatically. Under federal law, if a licensed customs broker allows a corporation to continue using their license to clear cargo after they have left the firm, the broker can be held personally liable for any illegal activity or fraudulent entries filed by that corporation. I had a strict legal obligation to report my departure immediately. On Saturday morning, I navigated to the portal's license maintenance section and filled out Customs and Border Protection Form 5125, the official notification of dissociation. I entered the corporate filer ID for Summit Maritime Group and submitted the request to dissociate my license, effective at 12:01 a.m. on Monday. Once the form was submitted, I drafted a formal, certified letter addressed to the Port Director of United States Customs and Border Protection at the Los Angeles Seaport. In the letter, I officially notified the government that I was no longer employed by Summit Maritime Group, that I had resigned from my role as a corporate officer, and that my individual license was no longer qualifying their corporate customs permit. I attached the receipt of my electronic Form 5125 submission. I printed the letter, walked to the local post office, and sent it via certified mail with return receipt requested. This was my legal bulletproof vest. If Preston tried to file any entry using my name, he would be committing identity theft and a felony violation of federal shipping laws. Before I closed my laptop for the weekend, I drafted a brief email to the Director of Human Resources at Summit Maritime Group, copying Preston Harrington. The email was short and professional. Please be advised that following my termination on Friday, August 14, 2026, I have officially filed Customs and Border Protection Form 5125 to dissociate my individual customs broker license from Summit Maritime Group Corporate Brokerage Permit. This dissociation is registered in the ACE database and is effective as of 12:01 a.m. on Monday, August 17, 2026. As the firm no longer employs a licensed individual officer, your corporate customs broker permit is suspended by operation of law under 19 CFR, Section 111.19. You must immediately cease all customs clearance operations. Any attempt to transmit entry filings to customs after this deadline will result in automated system rejection and potential federal civil penalties. I hit send, shut down my computer, and packed a small weekend bag. I drove up to my cabin in Big Bear Lake, far away from the noise of the city. I turned off my work phone and left it in the glove compartment of my car. I was going to enjoy a quiet weekend of hiking. Preston and his sales team wanted to run a logistics company without the burden of compliance rules. I was more than happy to let them try. To understand the magnitude of what I had done, one must understand how the customs system operates. In the logistics industry, a corporate customs permit is an active digital profile linked to the federal government's customs servers. Every time an entry clerk at Summit Maritime Group submits an import declaration, the system runs an automated check. It verifies that the corporation's permit is valid, and it verifies that there is an active, licensed qualifying broker associated with that permit. Under 19 CFR, Section 111.19, if a corporate customs broker loses its qualifying licensed officer, the corporation must immediately stop conducting customs business. The law provides a 120-day grace period to find a replacement, but that grace period is only granted if the company already has another licensed employee on staff who can be promoted to an officer position. But Summit Maritime Group did not have another licensed broker. Because of my long tenure, George Harrington had never felt the need to hire another licensed officer. I was the sole qualifying broker. Preston Harrington believed that my license was just a credential on a resume. He thought that because our junior entry clerks did the actual data entry, the system would keep running without me. He did not realize that the moment my license was dissociated, the digital key that unlocked the federal port servers for the company would be deleted. By Monday morning, Summit Maritime Group would have over 1,000 shipping containers arriving at ports across the United States. Without an active license to clear them, those containers would sit on the docks, accumulating demurrage fees by the hour. The clock was ticking, and Preston Harrington was about to learn a very expensive lesson in the rule of law. Monday morning at Summit Maritime Group began with a wave of absolute panic. At 8 o'clock, the entry operations department logged into the company's transportation management system to clear the weekend's arrivals. The system immediately rejected every single transmission. Across 50 computer screens in our Los Angeles, Seattle, and Newark offices, a flashing red warning banner appeared. CBP, Trasmashin Denened, qualifying broker license inactive. Permit suspended. The junior entry clerks tried to bypass the error, but the Federal Customs Gateway was ironclad. Without an active qualifying license links, the system refused to process any customs entries. By 9 o'clock, the port terminals began refusing to release our clients' containers. Summit Maritime Group had exactly 1,240 containers sitting at the docks or arriving that morning. Ocean carriers began generating automated invoices for demurrage, the port storage fees charged when cargo is not picked up on time. At $250 per container per day, the company was accumulating $310,000 in daily fines, a figure that would compound every single day the cargo remained stuck. Worse, the VoltEdge solution shipment of lithium-ion batteries had arrived. Because the system flagged the company's permit suspension, United States Customs inspectors pulled the VoltEdge containers for a physical hazard inspection. Upon opening the containers, the customs officers discovered 120 boxes of uncertified, non-UL-listed lithium-ion batteries, misclassified as standard electronics. Customs and Border Protection immediately issued a red ball hold on the cargo, seized the shipment, and sent a formal notice of intent to levy a $500,000 penalty for shipping fraud and customs misclassification. The chief executive officer of VoltEdge Solutions was on the phone by 10 o'clock, screaming at Preston Harrington. He threatened to cancel their $25 million contract immediately and file a lawsuit for millions in damages if his batteries were not delivered by Tuesday morning. Preston, finally realizing the magnitude of the disaster, rushed down to the operations floor. He called a meeting with Human Resources and the compliance team. The Human Resources director silently handed him the printout of the email I had sent on Saturday. Preston's face turned pale as he read it. "This is ridiculous," Preston shouted, slamming the paper onto the table. "He cannot just take his license and leave. He was an employee of this company. We paid him a salary. The license belongs to us." "Actually, Preston, it does not," the Human Resources director said quietly. "An individual customs broker license is issued by the Department of Homeland Security to a specific person, not a company. It is a personal professional credential, like a medical or legal license. We cannot own it, and we cannot force him to keep it registered to our firm. Then we will use his login," Preston ordered, turning to Clara Owens. "Clara, you have Walter's Ace Portal credentials saved in the department's shared password database. Log in under his name and submit the entries for the VoltEdge shipment. We need to clear these containers now." Clara Owens stared at him in disbelief. "Preston, I cannot do that. Walter officially dissociated his license on Saturday. If I log into the federal customs system using his credentials and transmit entries, I am committing federal wire fraud and customs broker identity theft. Under Title 19, Section 1641 of the United States Code, operating as a broker without a valid license or using another broker's license without authorization is a federal felony. It carries a 5-year prison sentence. I am not going to federal prison to save your contract. I am the chief operating officer of this company, and I am ordering you to do it." Preston yelled. "If you want to sign it, you do it yourself, Preston," Clara replied, standing up and packing her bag. "But I will not. In fact, I am resigning effective immediately. I will not be complicit in customs fraud." She walked out of the building, leaving Preston standing in the middle of the quiet operations floor. Preston spent the rest of the day frantically trying to call me. My personal phone remained off, safely tucked away in the glove box of my car in Big Bear Lake. He left dozens of voicemail messages, alternating between screaming threats of lawsuits and desperate pleas for me to return. In total, my phone logged 103 missed calls. On Tuesday morning, I drove back down from the mountains. I turned on my phone at 9 o'clock, and it immediately began buzzing. Amid the sea of messages from Preston, there was one from George Harrington, the company's founder. I dialed George's number. He answered on the first ring, his voice weak and trembling. "Walter, thank God you called," George said. "I am calling from the clinic. I have just been briefed on what is happening. The board is in a complete panic. We have over 1,000 containers blocked at the ports. Our daily demurrage is over $300,000, and Volt Edge is preparing to sue us. Walter, the company is going to go bankrupt in a week if we do not clear this cargo. What did you do?" "I did nothing but protect myself, George," I replied calmly. "Your son fired me on Friday for refusing to sign off on an illegal hazardous shipment of lithium-ion batteries. He called me an obsolete relic and had security escort me out. By law, the moment I was terminated, I had to dissociate my license from your corporate permit. If I had not, and Preston had filed those fraudulent entries under my name, I would be the one facing federal charges right now. I spent 23 years building this company with you, George. I would never have done this to you. But your son chose to throw me out like trash." George was silent for a long moment. "I am so sorry, Walter," George said, his voice cracking. "I should never have let him take over operations. He is out of his depth. Please, Walter, we need your license. We need you to save the firm. What will it take for you to come back?" "I will not come back as an employee, George," I said, "but I am willing to discuss a transition agreement to clear the backlog and help you find a new broker. We will meet at my lawyer's office at 2 o'clock this afternoon. Preston must be present. If he is not there, or if he says one word that I do not like, I will walk out and you can let your company sink. We will be there, Walter." "I promise," George said. I hung up the phone and smiled. The chessboard was set, and Preston Harrington was about to find out what happens when you try to play a game, when you do not even know the rules. The meeting took place in the conference room of my attorney, Harvey Ross. When I walked in with Harvey, George Harrington was already sitting at the table. He looked exhausted, the stress of the past 48 hours clearly taking a toll on his health. Next to him sat Preston Harrington, looking disheveled, his eyes bloodshot, and his hands trembling. Their corporate counsel sat between them, looking like a man who knew he had already lost the case. I sat down opposite George. The atmosphere was thick with tension. No one spoke for a long moment until Harvey opened his leather folder and slid a printed document across the table. "Gentlemen, this is the transition agreement," Harvey said, his voice calm. "We have outlined the terms under which Mr. Higgins is willing to assist Summit Maritime Group in resolving its current customs clearance crisis." "Let's hear them," George sighed. "First," Harvey began, "Mr. Higgins requires a lump sum severance payment of $1,200,000, which is equivalent to 5 years of his base salary. Second, the company will immediately pay out all of his accrued stock options and retirement match contributions, which total $480,000. The total monetary payment of $1,680,000 must be wired to Mr. Higgins's account before any documents are signed." Preston gasped, his face turning red. $1.6 million? That is insane. That is extortion. We are not paying you a penny. You sabotaged our business. "Preston, quiet," George warned, but Preston ignored him, turning his anger toward me. "We will sue you, Higgins. We will sue you for breach of contract, intentional interference with business relations, and corporate sabotage. You will spend every dime of that money on legal fees." Harvey Ross smiled thin-lipped and leaned forward. "Mr. Harrington, there is no contract. Your client terminated Walter. In the state of California, employment is at will. Mr. Higgins has no employment agreement that requires him to provide his professional license to a company that has terminated his employment. His customs broker license is his personal property. You have no legal claim to it. Furthermore, if you file a lawsuit, we will immediately file a countersuit for wrongful termination. We will also submit the full compliance file on the Volt Edge Solutions lithium-ion shipment, including the falsified ocean bills of lading, to the Department of Justice and the Port Director of United States Customs. I believe a federal smuggling investigation is the last thing Summit Maritime Group needs right now. The corporate counsel leaned over and whispered in Preston's ear. Preston's face drained of color as the lawyer shook his head. The third term, Harvey continued, is that the board of directors must issue a signed formal letter of apology to Mr. Higgins, acknowledging that his termination was without cause. And fourth, Preston Harrington must be immediately removed from all operational and executive duties at Summit Maritime Group, with a public announcement stating he has resigned to pursue other interests. No, Preston screamed, standing up. Father, you cannot agree to this. He is ruining my career. The board will never accept this. George Harrington looked up at his son, his eyes filled with cold disappointment. Sit down, Preston, he said quietly. Father, I said sit down. George roared, slamming his palm onto the table. The effort made him cough, and he paused to compose himself. He looked back at his son. You cost this company $25 million. You accumulated over $600,000 in Port Demarrage in 2 days. You tried to force our staff to commit federal fraud. You almost put this entire company into bankruptcy because of your arrogance. You are finished, Preston. You are leaving the firm. Preston stared at his father, his mouth open. He slowly sank back into his chair, completely broken. George turned his gaze back to me. Walter, the wire transfer will be executed within the hour. Our chief financial officer is ready to initiate the transfer. Once your bank confirms the receipt, will you help us clear the port backlog? Once the wire clears, I said, I will sign a 120-day limited consulting agreement. I will temporarily reassociate my license to Summit Maritime Group for the sole purpose of clearing the backlog of containers. My consulting fee will be $150,000, paid up front. However, I will not clear the Volt Edge Solutions shipment. Those containers will remain under customs hold until Volt Edge provides the verified safety certificates. If they cannot, they must return the cargo to Asia at their own expense. George Harrington nodded slowly. Agreed. We sat in silence for the next 40 minutes. The corporate counsel reviewed the documents, and George signed the board resolutions removing Preston from his position. At 2:45 in the afternoon, Harvey's phone buzzed. He checked his screen, smiled, and turned to me. The wire has cleared, Walter. $1,830,000 has been deposited into your account. I stood up, took the pen from Harvey, and signed the transition agreement. I looked at George and shook his hand. Thank you, George. It was a pleasure building the business with you. I did not look at Preston as I left the room. Over the next 4 months, I worked 20 hours a week as a consultant, helping the operations team clear the backup at the ports. True to my word, I kept my license associated with the firm until they were able to hire a qualified licensed broker to take over. The Volt Edge Solutions contract was canceled after the importer failed to provide the necessary certifications, and the cargo was eventually shipped back to Asia, costing Volt Edge millions. After my consulting contract ended, I officially retired from Summit Maritime Group. But I did not stay retired for long. I used a small portion of my payout to establish my own trade compliance firm, Higgins Compliance Consulting. Within 6 months, 3 of Summit Maritime Group's largest former clients, who had been horrified by the port shutdown and Preston's reckless management, canceled their contracts and signed with my new firm. They wanted to ensure their supply chains were overseen by someone who understood that in the world of international trade, compliance is not a bottleneck. It is the only thing that keeps you moving. Sometimes, when I am sitting in my new office, looking out at the harbor, I take a sip of scotch and remember the arrogant young chief operating officer who thought he could ignore the rules. He wanted speed, but in his rush to cut corners, he ended up freezing his entire empire. I wanted compliance, and in the end it paid me a fortune.